Hello YouTube, welcome back to another book review from me, your humble host, Logan Albright. Today I want to talk about this writer who I've talked about before. Her name is Kavan, which is not a real name, it's a pen name. But she wrote a novel called Ice, which I have reviewed on the channel, and I am constantly evangelizing. And if you haven't watched that review, you should go watch it. And if you haven't read Ice, you should read it because it's one of my favorite novels. I think it's amazing. And I was in a Barnes & Noble looking through the science fiction section, and I found this book, Selected Stories of Anna Kavan, Machines in the Head. And it's not really science fiction, but she's categorized in the science fiction section. This is an edition published by the New York Review of Books, and they have put out a lot of different volumes of various authors and their short stories. And this is collected stories from like 5 different collections, plus one previously unpublished. And I thought I would pick it up and read it. And it did not disappoint. I think she is a remarkable author. She's a, kind of mid-20th century writer, and much of her themes throughout all of her work revolve around mental illness, drug addiction, asylums, and things of that nature. And that's something that I'm really interested in. I really find mental illness a fascinating subject because it's like your own mind is turned against you, and that's so strange and hard to understand for me because your mind is mostly who you are. Your mind is something you rely on and you have trust. And if you can't trust your own mind, what can you trust? And that kind of idea is fascinating to me. So I like to read about that. And Anna Kavan was someone who was pushed into using heroin by her tennis instructor and had struggled with institutionalization and drug addiction and mental illness her whole life. And all of that is contained within this slim volume of stories. The first batch of stories are from a thing she did called Asylum Piece, which is sort of explicitly about being institutionalized. And it really has sort of a Soviet feel to it, or like a Kafka-esque feel to it as well. They're all very vague, kind of enigmatic stories, and they're all quite short, and they're all about paranoia and authority and alienation, and how like you can't relate to other people and they don't understand what you're going through, and it's like you're speaking a different language from them. And then there's all these kind of faceless bureaucrats who are just like make you fill out forms and do paperwork and tick all these boxes in order to get anything done, and it's an impenetrable wall. You're trying to like find a way to succeed and to live your life, and it's just they put up these barriers in front of you, and it's just you can't reason with them, you can't appeal to their emotions. It's just this gray-suited Soviet bureaucracy. And it's interesting because I really didn't like Soviet literature. I studied Russian in college, read a lot of Soviet literature, and I always found it bleak and nihilistic and depressing, and I never really enjoyed it. I just didn't connect to it. There was no one I could relate to. And I find Anna Kavan, her stories remind me of those stories in the sense that there's always this bureaucracy you're fighting, and there's a bleakness, and there's a sense of alienation, but it doesn't hit me the same way. And maybe it's because I'm older and I have more world experience, or maybe it's because there's something about her as a British writer that differs from the Russians. And it seems like it's more personal. It's more about her. It's more about her own mind than it is about the society she's living in. Although there's certainly lots of themes about society in there. And that's another thing that I find fascinating is kind of this concept of authority. As a libertarian writer, I find the authority can be very sinister, and that certainly is conveyed here. Is people trying to control this woman, trying to lock her away, they say they're trying to help her, but are they really trying to help her? Maybe they're trying to control her because she lives her life differently from other people. So I find all those themes really fascinating, and these stories are interesting because they're not cut and dried narratives. They don't have beginning, middle, and end. They tend to be little slice of life kind of things, and they're very interior focused. They're focused on the narrator's own mind. And the title story, Machines in the Head, is basically about not being able to sleep because your brain is messing with you and your brain is torturing you. And I don't really suffer from insomnia and I don't really have that problem, but I've talked to people who have, and it sounds like something that is, you're fighting your own mind, and that's interesting to me. And I think that's the state of life that people who struggle with mental illness are going through, is they're fighting their own mind, and it's like they have these infernal machines clanking away in their brain that won't give them any peace, won't let them have any rest. So I found all that really interesting, and I really like those stories. And then it moves on to a couple other story collections. And I think these are even better because they are a little bit more subtle. They're not quite as direct in their depiction of mental illness, although that is still the theme throughout. I think my favorite story in the book is one which is called A Bright Green Field. And A Bright Green Field, it sounds like a really lovely little title, right? It sounds like a nice, peaceful, pastoral story about nature and about, being just happy to be out in the sunshine and seeing everything. But Anna Kavan takes a bright green field, that phrase, and turns it on its head and makes it into something sinister and threatening. The brightness of it is piercing and overwhelming and unnatural. The greenness of it is ugly and sickly and too green. It's not a natural green, it's an unnatural green. And there's this blurring of this line between what's real and what is fantasy. So the story involves a woman seeing this bright green field everywhere she goes, and she sees laborers on the field mowing the grass, and they're chained to the grass, and they're laboring in kind of slavery or servitude, and the grass is growing relentlessly and it's threatening, and you have to keep it in check. If you don't cut it, it's going to take over. And all this is not real, clearly. Like, there's a blurring of that line, which she does in all of her work, where it's like, how much of this is real and how much of this is in the writer's imagination? Is it a hallucination or something like that? And that's always left up to the reader to decide. It's never really spelled out. And these things are put along side by side, so that things that sound very realistic and natural are right next to things that seem impossible. And so you're like, well, is some of this real and some of it not? Is none of it real? Is all of it real? Hard to say. And I think that's really interesting. But the act of mowing the grass becomes an act of war. It becomes an act of self-defense. And that is something that, you don't usually think about when you think about a bright green field. When you think about grass, you don't think about grass as something that is a danger or a threat. And I'm reminded of this essay by one of my favorite writers, G.K. Chesterton, who kind of takes the opposite stance, the opposite perspective on the world. And G.K. Chesterton is great because he's so positive and he's so uplifting. And he has an essay called Wonder and the Wooden Post, which is about finding the divine and the beautiful in everyday objects. And he talks about something as prosaic and as boring and as ugly as a piece of wood sticking out of the ground. He can find all these really hopeful and optimistic and beautiful and poetic interpretations of that. And he kind of applies that to everything in all of his writings. And I love that. I think it's just amazing and beautiful. And so if Chesterton finds the positive and the divine and the beautiful and the transcendent in everyday, very boring objects, Anna Kavan has managed to find the sinister, the diabolical, the threatening, the dangerous, the sinister, I already said sinister, in all of these everyday objects, including the bright green field. So I thought that was a really amazing story. And then there's another story in here, which is called, is it Julia? I'm forgetting the name. I think it is Julia. Julia and the Bazooka, yeah. And Julia and the Bazooka, more than any other story in here, is clearly autobiographical and overtly autobiographical. It's about a woman who is seduced into using heroin by her tennis instructor, which is what happened to Anna Kavan. And the Bazooka is the name that her doctor gives for the syringe that administers the heroin. And that's a really interesting metaphor, the idea of a bazooka as something that administers these drugs, these really powerful drugs. And this whole story is kind of it's about her life and it's about her addiction and everything. And there's this duality to everything, because the bazooka, she says when she's young, the word bazooka is used as a kind of silly, nonsense word that it makes the syringe seem unthreatening and it makes it seem laughable. It's just a funny word. But bazooka is also clearly a very dangerous and deadly weapon of war. And so you have that kind of duality of something that's funny and something that sounds goofy with the uka sound in there middle, and then something that is really dangerous and deadly and disastrous. And those two things are combined into one in this plastic syringe that she carries around with her. And her relationship with the drug is very complicated because, she talks about how the drug makes her feel safe and it makes her feel in control and it makes her feel like, all the demons that have been tormenting her are kind of silenced through the use of this drug. And that seems like a good thing. And she's, happy that she's able to use it and it makes her life better. And she's talking about it like it's medicine, like it's treating a problem, And I think a lot of people think of self-medicating in that sense. And maybe that's accurate. I don't know. But on the other hand, at the end of the story, it's clear that this kind of destroyed her life at the same time. Like, there's a doctor in the story who doesn't even advise her to get off of it. He's like, you're using it safely. It's helping you. You might as well just stay on it and keep using the drug. But it's clear that it's sort of eating away at her. And the bazooka is starting to, blow holes in her. And she uses the name Julia in the story, but her name is not Julia. And her real name, neither her real name nor her pen name is Julia. But you can tell that this is about her And it's ultimately very sad, and all these stories are very sad because there's this desperation and this hopelessness, and there's just emptiness in her life where she just can't live the way other people live. And she's paranoid about everything. Everyone's a threat. Everyone's a danger. Her own mind torments her. And I think all that's really very, very sad. But I think she's just a great writer and someone who uses language in a very creative and interesting way to kind of represent these ideas through metaphor and through very abstract ways of speaking, where it's not just direct and spelled out for you. So I really love her. She's written a couple other books and a couple other novels that I want to check out. I haven't read yet. I know someone recommended Sleep Has His House, which is on my list of things I want to read. But I just want to return to Anna Kavan as a writer and continue to evangelize her and say how great she is. And hopefully some of my viewers will pick up one of her books and read them. I quite enjoyed this little New York Review of Books edition. I think it's short, it's easy reading, it's nice. It's a pleasant enough design book. It's a little bit incomplete for me. I like the first collection, and here I said is from Asylum Piece. I kind of wish I just had bought Asylum Piece on its own and read the whole thing, because now if I buy it, there's going to be duplications in there, which I probably will still do eventually. But just taking a few stories out of a longer piece, it seems to me like I should read the whole thing. So that's sort of a drawback of it, but it's a pretty nice edition, and they have them from many other writers. So that's what I wanted to say about Anna Kavan. I hope you will check her out if you've not heard of her before. If you have heard of her and you have read her, please let me know what you think of her in the comments. I'd be interested in that. But I just think a tragic figure with lots of interesting things to say about a lot of themes that are very relevant in society, like mental illness, paranoia, bureaucracy, authority, drug addiction, all those type of things. Very good, very relevant. So that's what I have to say about Anna Kavan today. I hope you've enjoyed this review. If you have, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave me a comment down below, and click the bell for notifications. And I'll be back with you next week with another book review. Don't know what it's going to be yet, but it'll be fun, whatever it is. Thank you so much for watching. I've been Logan Albright, and I will catch you next time.